Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful and honestly one of the most misunderstood systems in the country, child welfare. And we're not going to do it with a bunch of dry statistics. No, we're going to see how it really works through the story of one family, one little girl, and a single custody case in North Carolina that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how these life-altering decisions get made. And this case gets personal fast. That quote right there from the mother, Kelly O'Neill, it just cuts right to the heart of it, doesn't it? It captures the desperation, the frustration, and the incredibly high stakes for everyone involved. It's a story about a family, a child, and a system, all trying to figure out what's right, often with just devastating results. So that's the big question we're tackling. How does a private family problem blow up into this massive public legal battle? We're going to follow the timeline, we're going to meet the people at the center of it, and see how this one family's crisis shines a huge spotlight on a system that affects families all across the country. All right, let's dive in. So our story, which in the court records is known as In Re MB, really begins at that moment when the conflict between two parents gets to a point where the state decides it has no choice but to step in. Okay, so who are the key players here? Well, right in the middle of it all, you have Maura, a 9-year-old girl. Then there's her mother, Kelly O'Neill, who court documents note has diagnosed mental health conditions. You have her father, Michael Bridges, who has a documented history of substance use. And finally, the government agency that enters their lives, the Union County Department of Social Services, which everyone just calls DSS. The official legal starting gun goes off on November 6, 2023. This is the day SSS files a formal petition with the court, and the allegations are really serious. We're talking neglect, concerns about the mother's mental health and how it impacts her parenting, improper discipline, and possible drug use. This single piece of paper is what brings the full force of the child welfare system crashing into their lives. And as soon as that petition is filed, this huge, complex legal machine just grinds into gear. Now, to really get what happens next, we've got to define a few key terms. These are the concepts at the very heart of how this system works. First up is this fancy Latin term, parens patriae. It literally translates to parent of the nation. And this is the core legal idea that gives the state the power to get involved in family life in the first place. The thinking is, if a parent can't properly care for their child, the state has a duty to step in and act as a protector. This is the legal foundation for all of Child Protective Services. Next up, you have the guardian ad litem, or GAL. This is a really fascinating role. A GAL is a volunteer appointed by the court whose one and only job is to be an independent voice for the child. The GAL investigates everything, talks to everyone, and then tells the judge what they think is in Maura's best interest. They don't work for the mom, the dad, or DSS. Their only client is the child. And finally, there's the case plan. You should think of this as a roadmap back to getting your kid home. Once the court identifies the problems, it creates this formal to-do list for the parents. Completing this plan, checking all the boxes, is pretty much the only way for a parent to prove to the court that things are better and it's safe for their child to return. And this case plan, this is exactly where the story forks into two completely different roads. Because in this case, the mother and father took dramatically different approaches to that plan, and that contrast ended up defining the entire outcome. According to the court records, the father, Michael Bridges, basically did everything that was asked of him. He did a substance use assessment that came back clean, no need for treatment. He passed every single drug test. He went and finished his parenting classes, and his supervised visits with Maura were positive. By the end of it all, DSS and the court looked at him and said, yep, he's an appropriate placement for his daughter. The mother, Kelly O'Neill, well, her path was completely different. Court records paint a picture of non-compliance. She didn't do the drug tests DSS asked for. She didn't follow through on a psychologist's recommendation for more intensive therapy. Her visits with Maura reportedly became so chaotic that the court eventually had to stop them. And this is a big one, she repeatedly violated court orders, especially with a flood of volatile text messages and social media posts aimed at the social worker and the GAL. And just to give you a sense of the intensity we're talking about, you just have to read the evidence. This is a direct quote from a text message Ms. O'Neill sent to the DSS social worker. As you can imagine, this kind of message raised major safety concerns for the court and for everyone working on the case. But, and this is a huge but, there is another side to the story. Miss O'Neill's perspective, which she lays out in her own legal filings, is that she wasn't just being defiant, she felt she was being discriminated against. She argued the system was punishing her for behaviors that were linked to her diagnosed mental health conditions, conditions that are supposed to be protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. She felt the system wasn't accommodating her disability, it was using it against her. So you have this deep, deep conflict between what the mother was doing and how she saw the situation. And all of that led to some really serious and pretty controversial rulings from the judge. And this is where the case brings up a huge legal question. In response to Ms. O'Neill's constant posting, the court actually issued a gag order, which makes you wonder, can they even do that? Can a court legally stop a parent from talking about their own child custody case online? This is the core legal tug-of-war right here. On one side, you've got the mother's First Amendment right to free speech. The law makes it incredibly hard for the government to issue a prior restraint that's telling someone what they can't say before they even say it. But on the other side, the court has that parens patria duty to protect the child. The court's argument was basically that all the public drama from the social media posts was hurting Mara, and that its duty to protect her was more important than the mother's right to post. And so, after almost a full year of hearings, filings, and conflict, the court made its final call on October 16, 2024. The ruling was clear and decisive. The court found that reunification with the mother just wasn't possible. It granted sole legal and physical custody of Maura to her father, Michael Bridges. Now, the story of this one family didn't just happen in a vacuum. The O'Neill-Bridges case actually tells us a lot about some deep, systemic problems inside the North Carolina child welfare system as a whole. So let's zoom out for a minute. One of the biggest red flags is racial disproportionality. I mean, look at this chart. It's based on the state's own data, and it tells a stark story. Black children make up about 27% of all kids in North Carolina, but they account for nearly half of all kids in foster care. That massive gap suggests that there might be some systemic biases influencing which families get looked at and whose kids get taken away. And here's a huge reason why the system is under so much pressure. North Carolina actually has the unfortunate distinction of having the least state-funded child welfare system in the entire nation. That chronic lack of funding means social workers have impossibly high caseloads, families don't get the support services they need, and the quality of care can be wildly different from one county to the next. Now, the good news is that these problems aren't a secret. There is a real push for reform happening right now. As you can see from this timeline, since 2021, we've seen a new judicial task force focused on childhood trauma, new bipartisan laws like the Fostering Care Act that give the state more oversight, and the rollout of a brand new statewide data system called PathNC that's meant to make things more consistent across all 100 counties. And all of this brings us to our final thought. The story of Maura Bridges is powerful, and it's difficult. It really forces us to confront this fundamental question. When a family is falling apart and the system designed to help them is itself stretched to the breaking point, how do the courts, actually figure out what is truly in the best interest of the child? There are no easy answers here.